the CGIAR's Climate Action Science Program. We have been running these seminars, preparing in anticipating our participation in the COP30. And most of these webinars are looking at what were the decisions that happened in COP29 and how would the discussions go around in COP30. So in this particular, our previous two webinars, one was on Article 6.8 and the second one was on NCQG. So this is the third in that series of webinar, and today we are going to discuss the global goals on adaptation. And we have an illustrious list of speakers. All of them are UNFCCC appointed experts on the GGA team. And my colleague Lucy, who would be moderating this webinar, would introduce all the speakers. But very briefly, we have Michael Nagy, who is from the water group of the expert group, Teresa, who is from the food, Elizabeth from the ecosystem group, and Shara, who's representing the health group. The way we would do today, can we go to the next slide quickly? Just some brief rules of engagement. We encourage all of you to introduce yourself in the chat and ask your questions in the Q&A. Then do share your feedback. Stay on mute when not talking, engage in the Q&A. And we are recording this webinar, so just so that know that this is being recorded. This webinar would be mostly in the form of a panel discussion, which will be conducted by my colleague Lucy, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Alliance of Biodiversity, and CIAT, which is a part of the CGIAR. And my introduction, my name is Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, and I lead the CGIAR's Climate Impact Platform and work with the whole of CGIAR's climate scientists on various climate-related issues. So without further ado, welcome all of you. We would have 1 hour of very important discussions around the global goals of discussion on global goals on adaptation. I hand over to Lucy to take this forward. Over to you, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for finding time to join us during this series where today we'll be focusing on the global goal on adaptation. As Aditi has mentioned, my name is Lucy Njuguna. I work for the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. My day-to-day research focuses on adaptation tracking, but I also follow very closely the negotiations on the global goal on adaptation, and I'm one of the experts that is supporting the development of the indicators for the GGA. So I'll start with a bit of a background. If you can go to the next slide, please. I'll start with the brief background on the topic of the global goal on adaptation, just to bring everyone up to speed in terms of where we started the establishment of the GGA, and then giving an update on where we are at in terms of the development of GGA indicators. And then after that, I'll be introducing our panel, and we have good interactions and questions prepared for us. For the global goal on adaptation, of course, adaptation has been on the UNFCCC agenda for a while, but it's only until 2015 where we had the establishment of a global goal on adaptation. And this was through the Paris Agreement. And it's under Article 7.1, where we had the introduction of a collective ambition to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. And here also we see the introduction of that. We also want to contribute to sustainable development and ensure adequate adaptation response in the context of the temperature goal, which is 1.5 degrees. So as you can see, the goal itself was quite vaguely framed because we have these three major concepts that even within the scientific space, there hasn't been a consensus on how to measure them. And so since then, there has been really slow progress on designing a framework that can be used to measure progress towards this global goal on adaptation. And since 2015, we've had some discussions going on. And here, what we have on the slide is just a summary of the major milestones. There has been quite a lot of discussions happening throughout the years. But for example, it's only until 2022 where we had the establishment of the first work program, under which there were supposed to be focused discussions on how to operationalize the global goal on adaptation. And part of the mandate of this work program was even to share lessons and get into discussions on how to design metrics and indicators for the global goal on adaptation. And in this first work program, which was for 2 years, it was mostly comprised of workshops. So in total, 8 workshops were held in different countries. And we had negotiators, observer organizations, various experts coming in to share knowledge on how to operationalize the global goal on adaptation. We didn't manage to get like the specifics of what the indicators should be, but we see the emergence of the first kind of structured framework that forms the foundation for what then was agreed at COP28 in 2023 with the introduction of 11 global goal on adaptation targets. The 11 GGA targets, we have 7 that are focused on key themes or sectors where adaptation takes place, so including agriculture, water, health, biodiversity, and so forth. And we have 4 additional targets that align with the adaptation cycle. So this is where you're moving from assessing climate risks, planning for adaptation, implementing, and then monitoring, evaluation, and learning to then incorporate back any insights from implementing adaptation to improve further adaptation actions. And in addition to getting an agreement on the 11 targets, there was also the launch of an additional 2-year work program that was specifically dedicated to developing indicators for the assessment of the 11 GGA targets. Fast forward, the work program has been now in operation. And one of the key elements that has been incorporated into the work program was, for example, the mapping of existing indicators. And so there was an invitation for parties and observer organizations to share information on any indicators that they are currently using. And out of this mapping, we have a database of more than 10,000 indicators that have been mapped, whether they come from national adaptation plans, nationally determined contributions, or even indicators that are being tracked by various UN custodian agencies, or even organizations and NGOs that are currently implementing adaptation. And they shared some of the indicators coming from their M&A frameworks. And another key element in this work program is the involvement of experts. So we have 78 experts that have been nominated to support the technical process of designing indicators for the GGA. So as Aditi mentioned, our panel is actually comprised of some of the experts representing different thematic areas. But in total, we have 78 experts distributed across the globe, and each expert is assigned to one target where they then focus on refining and developing indicators. And over the last couple of UNFCCC sessions, both during the COP and during the sessions of the subsidiary bodies, we've also seen countries establishing an agreed criteria that then should be guiding the review of the indicators. And this helps to articulate what parties want to see on that list of indicators when we finally get to have this list negotiated and hopefully agreed on at COP30. So then if you can show the next slide. So here I just listed the criteria. I won't go through it, but I will be sharing the slides after the webinar and you can have a look just to familiarize yourself. And on the next slide, it's just a summary of what countries have actually summarized in terms of what they want to see. So for example, what came out of COP29 is that countries have said, since we had this big database of 10,000 indicators, which of course can be used to assess adaptation at a global level, at the end of this whole process, they want a set of manageable, not more than 100 indicators that will then be used to assess adaptation. And it needs to capture various aspects, including those indicators being globally applicable, but at the same time, try and capture various adaptation contexts. And so today we have a great panel that we've lined up that will be helping us unpack this whole process and experience with developing GGA indicators. And we'll have a second round of discussions where we'll be linking it more closely to the kind of work that each panelist does. And we're hoping that this will also help you to reflect on how you see these discussions on the GGA linking back to the research or the policy processes that you engage in back in your home organizations and your home country. So I will quickly introduce the panel before passing on the mic to them to respond to the first question. And the first panelist we have is Michael Nagy. Michael has a master's degree on landscape design and planning from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. And he currently works as a statistician at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And he is one of the experts focusing on the water target. Next, we have Teresa Wong. If you can move to the next slide. Yes. And Teresa is the head of science of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit, which is co-hosted at the Singapore Management University. And she is an expert supporting the work on the target on food and agriculture. Next, we have Shoro Dasgupta, who is an environmental economist at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, CMCC, and is a visiting senior fellow at the London School of Economics. And he's an expert supporting the work on developing indicators for the health targets. Next, we have Elizabeth Gilmore, who is an associate professor in environmental engineering and public policy at Carleton University in Canada. And she's an expert supporting the work in developing indicators for the ecosystems and biodiversity target. So thank you, dear colleagues, for joining, and thanks for agreeing to share with us the experience you've had in developing GGA indicators. And so my first question to you is first to tell us what your target is about. And if you can tell us how you're navigating the process of developing indicators, what are some of the key aspects that are emerging and maybe even some of the challenges that you're experiencing? If I can start with you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you very much for having me today and to have the opportunity to share some thoughts in this area. Yeah, the question is about the water target. So the GGA's water target, as you can expect, centers on addressing climate-induced water scarcity and enhancing resilience to water-related hazards such as droughts, floods, and extreme weather events. And the water group, where I'm a member of, consisted initially of 9 experts. Now it has been growing a little bit over time, including representatives from your organization, from CGIAR, from UNICEF, European Environment Agency, Food and Agriculture organizations, academia, and also from national agencies from Brazil and Saudi Arabia. And from this list of 10,000 indicators that you have mentioned, Lucy or Aditi, about 1,000 were mapped indicators related to water adaptation. And we made a careful review in this group, and we came up with 427 relevant for general resilience and a bit more than 300 indicators directly aligned with adaptation-specific objectives. In our second phase of the work, we developed an indicator selection methodology based on a few key principles. And one important key principle is to prioritize indicators from established international frameworks, such as the Sustainable Development Goals or the Sender framework, because they are already widely used and supported by existing data systems. But of course, the indicators have to address the key subcomponents of the water target, which is reducing climate-induced water scarcity, climate resilience to water-related hazards, then the transition towards a climate-resilient water supply, climate-resilient sanitation, and also access to safe and affordable potable water for all. Another criterion is to distinguish between action and outcome indicators. So we need to distinguish between indicators that describe the policy actions and indicators that actually assess the effectiveness of adaptation measures, such as changes in water stress levels or improvements in drinking water safety. Another criterion is this distinction between the global and contextual indicators. What you said, Lucy, we need something that is kind of consistency and comparable across countries, and then the contextual indicators which describe country-specific aspects and can be chosen from. And lastly, very important, of course, the criteria of relevance, feasibility, and inclusivity. We think indicators really must be relevant to measure the target, the sub-target, but of course we also have to look at the feasibility of production of the indicators. However, feasibility is not always possible in all countries. I know I have already achieved my 3 minutes, but maybe you can give me 10 more seconds. Feasibility is an important criteria for the indicator production, but we think that relevant indicators, even if data is not available, for example, in developing countries, that this can actually trigger the production of this data, for example, through capacity development activities. And key challenges, this is my last few sentences in this initial intervention, is to ensure methodological coherence across targets and sub-targets, I think is a big challenge. Then addressing data availability gaps and the incorporation of inclusion dimensions such as gender, equity, and so on. Over to you, Lucy. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I think that was a very good overview of the work that you're doing under the water target. And it's good to see some of the emerging aspects and how you are considering the criteria, including the question of data availability, which I think is quite critical. And just a reminder to the participants, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A chat board, and we'll try to address them as we move along. Next, I would like to ask Teresa if you'd like to give your reflection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thanks for that overview. I think by now a lot of people do know some of the major criteria or that we're working with, and I want to thank you also yourself, Lucy, for your leadership in the Target 9B group, and we've been really working really nicely together. I think I won't repeat so much of what Michael said, but I know that the workshop last week I think gave me a lot of pause for reflection on the methodology that we've been employing in the Target 9B group. So I think we did quite early a gap analysis. We kind of started with that, and I think that really helped us to zoom in on some of the major issues or concerns with the data set. I think that really helped. Things that popped out included, production indicators being overwhelmingly large. Of course, there's quantity, but not necessarily quality. Things like supply and distribution were relatively poor, and access and nutrition indicators were poor. So what I'm describing are the elements of the components of Target 9B, which I will say now the line is actually attaining climate resilient food and agricultural production and supply and distribution of food, as well as increasing sustainable and regenerative production and equitable access to adequate food and nutrition for all. So I think that gap analysis really helped us, and I know Lucy, you're also leading on having us maybe sort of produce a kind of impact pathway or some key result areas to track climate impact drivers or climate drivers of certain impacts to agriculture, and then their adaptation actions, and then the outcomes for that met some of the criteria of 12B, namely adaptive capacity, improving resilience, and reducing vulnerability. So I think the last week I think has sort of led me to think we're still really on the right track. I think some of the discussions involved, the things that Michael talked about, feasibility, whether we should really prioritize indicators that had already established methodologies and were being collected. I do know that our data set has a large number of them. Maybe I think 70% was the last mapping that we did that were existing indicators. However, I think that the drive, I think within the expert group and also the parties towards more ambition, and for the GGA to really to allow ourselves to sort of project forward and see what we think we need in terms of adaptation, I think was a really big message from this last week that I think supports the move of the group on Target 9B to really parse out what we mean by indicators on agriculture and all the different components of agriculture without sort of missing them out or privileging one over another. But of course, I think the number of indicators really also shows us, what sorts of data that can be more easily collected, and maybe what even countries prioritize, including impacts on production. So I think that's the sort of midway point. Of course, I'm over 20 seconds, but I do think some of the challenges are looking into interlinkages. I think a lot of our groups are feeling the need to really focus on bringing out what the core indicators that mean something to our target groups, and then being able to then come together and make sure that we make those interlinkages, and also to make this data set more manageable through finding these interlinkages. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa. And again, you bring out an important point, which is in addition to the question of data availability, it's a question of how we can be ambitious but also practical in the kind of indicators that we define. But also very importantly, the question of how we address the interlinkages between the targets. Because, for example, water has a lot of relevance when it comes to adaptation in the agriculture. Next, I'd like to pass it on to Shoro. If you can also share with us the reflection.
Yeah, thank you to Lucy and to Aditi for putting this together in the secret team. It's easy to go after Michael and Teresa here. So I'm part of the health target group where our goal is to attain resilience against climate change related health impacts, but also to promote climate resilient health services while significantly reducing climate related morbidity and mortality. So as you can see, it's these three distinct parts that we're dealing with, and we had nearly 1,000 indicators submitted from various parties, UN agencies, and it has been quite a learning experience to look into health services, morbidity and mortality in the context of adaptation. So our task group, we sort of started reflecting that an indicator must provide a relevant aspect for adaptation in the context of health. And additionally, it should reflect intersection of both health and climate change. So a lot of those indicators have not done so. And so that was our first challenge. The first screening for us took a very long time to understand, and we were also a pretty small group. And one of our first challenges was to look into how and if the indicator is already available for some countries, but might be difficult to monitor for other countries. Or for many countries, it may not even be relevant to monitor, right? And finally, we spent quite a bit of time thinking that an indicator should not incentivize maladaptation in the context of climate and health, right? Especially because we are looking into a short list of indicators that can be applied to and that reflects different regional, national, and local circumstances. We have spent quite a bit of time looking into vulnerability aspect of health. Health is one of those sectors that already has, let's say, underlying vulnerability and inequality taken into account. But we feel right now that many of the indicators suggested do not reflect the vulnerability aspect well. And that's been part of the challenge. But I don't want to spend too much time on the gaps, but I feel the gaps are kind of important because it provides us the next stepping stone, right? So many of our indicators are applicable to only a small set of countries, right? And this is sort of the nature of climate and health challenge. It can often be very regional, right? We have looked into data availability and the data issues. And we see that data is not already available for many of the indicators and likely may not be easily collected by countries, right? And we also have been thinking hard about the cost effectiveness, or if collecting data might not be cost effective for countries. And given that many of the data points are self-reported, we have been thinking about, and we need to think more about self-reporting bias and the challenges to validation of the indicators, right? So to end, one of our solutions is to provide a suitable, let's say a suite of indicators depending on local context and local hazards, right? So we want to develop a menu of indicators per domain within the health target group, which countries can select as appropriate given by the hazards they face. For example, countries such as Bangladesh would likely choose dengue, whereas in many European countries, that is a disease that may not be relevant at all. So I think that for us, that suite is going to be very critical as we go forward. And with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Oro. Again, building quite a lot on the points mentioned earlier. And I think one of the points you're raising is the question of data quality. It's not just availability of data, but how can we even ascertain what will be reported against the indicators we're coming up with. Then next, I would like to ask Elizabeth also to share her reflections based on the work they're doing under ecosystem and biodiversity group. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. And listening to my colleagues here, I mean, I think we've really faced many of these same challenges. We started with over 700 submitted indicators for ecosystems. We're a wonderful team, but yet also a small team who are trying to sort of manage this and bring shape to it. And so we've encountered many of these same sort of tensions around data availability, readiness of indicators, but also we have some of our, each theme can have its own challenges. And I think what for nature and ecosystems and biodiversity, adaptation, which is in the text, right, it's fundamental to reducing climate impacts. But in this, in Parat 9D, which is ours in the GGA text, they also ask us to talk about increasing the, not just the resilience of ecosystems, but accelerating the use of ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions. So in fact, that sort of sets out a challenge here where healthy biodiversity and resilient ecosystems are also fundamental to effective climate adaptation. So we're trying to sort of deal with both of these issues. And so for us, the interlinkages, especially those, for example, with sustainable livelihoods, really jump out, really capturing the diversity of ways that nature can support us. I think we've also taken a bit of that approach of assessing, especially some of the existing indicators from global frameworks, SDGs, but also the Convention on Biological Diversity and the GBF. And so here, trying to build upon established methodologies, trying to avoid duplication. And so we have some good indicators, for example, the Red List Index, which shows trends in overall extinction risk. But we also have to note that biodiversity has its own pressures on it. And so what is the contribution or the attribution to climate adaptation? Essentially asking, can we see that signal through the noise? And what would that look like, especially over shorter time periods? So really asking not just can we track it, but what is it that we can see these indicators? And I think, again, really trying to balance that the effectiveness and tracking of inputs, actions, and outputs. I think there's two more challenges, if you'll bear with me, for ecosystems that bear mentioning. One is really the diversity of ecological contexts globally, aiming to develop indicators that are adaptable to regional and local settings is really key. But while it's important to ensure that relevance and applicability to these different ecosystems, we also know that there are emerging interlinkages that can make biodiversity much more than the sum of its parts. So I think that balance is very critical for us. And also just, it bears noting, and not a lot of indicators were strongly submitted into our initial data set, but that nature holds many values. It holds cultural and spiritual values, especially for Indigenous peoples and local communities. And this is really an irreplaceable foundation for well-being. And so when we've been going through and thinking about our shortlist, that tension in some ways between achieving accuracy and keeping things practical and measurable really does need to be balanced with keeping in all the relevant voices.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Again, very fantastic reflections, additional elements coming out, including the question of contribution versus attribution. So even if we have this aspect, especially in the case where you're using proxy indicators, how do you link them back to the adaptation process for you to be able to convincingly show that whatever you are tracking is actually linked to adaptation? And that's the end of the first round of questions, and we already have quite a few of questions in the Q&A. But I know we can't manage to go through all of them. So I'll also encourage the panelists if you can also respond in writing in the Q&A. But maybe I'll throw one of the questions that has been posted, and feel free to, in 1 minute, please, because you're already running behind, if you can be able to reflect on how, as you work on the indicators, you've managed to address the question of means of implementation. I know in the workshop last week, this was a major point of discussion in relation to how you capture the issues to do with the financial resources required to implement adaptation, but also how you integrate the other component, which is captured in this paragraph in relation to the enablers of adaptation implementation. If you can just briefly reflect on how you're considering this as you develop indicators. And if I can start with Michael.
Yeah, I'm afraid I cannot really reflect on that because our group has just started working on that, and I was also not attending the workshop last week because of other commitments. So maybe I can ask other speakers to go first with that one, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks. Anyone who would like to take the question?
Yeah, no, this is a really tough one. I think it was really good to hear parties because we can draw, we Lucy and I, I think, tried to draw out some examples from our data set that address finance, technology, and adaptive capacity. And in fact, a majority, when we did the tagging and looking at the sort of three elements of the GGA with adaptive capacity, resilience, and lowering vulnerability, we found that many of them were situated in adaptive capacity. There's a lot of interest in the indicator submissions for adaptive capacity to be reached. However, I don't know if that satisfies, because I think a lot of this is about finance. There was also an argument about differentiating MOIs with enablers. Enablers are not quite the same thing, but a lot of the indicators should also address, what are some of the enabling environments. But I think some parties do one more than that. In the end, I think it will come to that technical, sort of arbitration of that data set into something manageable, and that would also, try to get at some of these enabling conditions. I think it's a really tough one. I don't think we have answers, so all of us are still working on them, but we do see elements of these three. This is sort of my answer.
Okay, thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa, and completely support Teresa's stance on this. I don't think we're there yet, but what was great during the bond workshop was to learn from the parties in the health sector. We try to think of early warning systems in the context of climate and health as an example to map out MOI and adaptive capacity and so on. And again, funding is the main barrier, right? There is a substantial heterogeneity between early warning systems established in high-income countries, where more than half of them have established some sort of early warning systems, whereas less than 1/5 of low and middle-income countries have something similar. So again, some of these heterogeneities are showing up, but and as Sarah's already aptly said, we're not quite there yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharu. Elizabeth, would you like to add any reflections on the question of means of implementation and enablers?
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, first, I'll sort of reiterate that same point that this is challenging, but not something that we can't sort of rise. I mean, we will rise to the occasion, but it does require some pretty careful consideration on what is trackable and what really should be tracked. For us in particular, one of the things that we've been focusing a fair bit on is trying to find indicators that can help us get to the resources to where they're needed. And so a lot of the indicators that exist, for example, like SDGs, tell us about like % of budgets that are allocated to different aspects of ecosystem conservation and other features. So that gives us an indication of resources, but we really, I think, would want to take very seriously ensuring not only does it get to where it needs to go, but that we also have some measure of effectiveness.
Okay. Thank you so much for that reflection. I think also in the next round of questions, I would like to build on a point that has come out, I think, from all the panelists on the question of data availability and also the clarity on the methods to operationalize some of the indicators that you're seeing coming out and are likely to be adopted for measuring progress in the GGA, and asking you to reflect on basically on the various roles where you are currently serving, whether it's for research for the IPCC, and how you see the opportunity to continue advancing discussions on the GGA. But even after establishing the indicators, how can we continue making sure that we have good quality data being available to be able to assess progress in adaptation? And if I can start in reverse order and maybe start with Shaura and Elizabeth from a research and university perspective, how do you see them contributing to advancing measurement of adaptation and availing evidence that helps us to assess adaptation progress?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, and thank you, Lucy. And so I'll start sort of not answering question, but talking about something which we mentioned, attribution. I think one of the primary contributions from academics on climate change research itself and adaptation is attributing climate change to specific health impacts, right? So currently we have quite a bit of research ongoing on this, and we do hope to publish this out, but attribution is sort of the holy grail, right? This is how we understand where the impacts are taking place and how much impacts have taken place, right? And then now I'm going to the general question. Some of this, again, just reflecting on the discussion we have already had, research really needs to focus on adaptation effectiveness, right? This is how we will figure out which adaptation strategies work, and even more important, which don't work, right? The sort of maladaptation hangs above us. And then going into more, we really need more research on limits of adaptation as well. It's, and this is sort of something economists like myself have hijacked, limits on adaptation. So you guys really need to get rid of people like me, because understanding limits is critical in this context. And finally, this effectiveness in limits will get us to the costs of adaptation, right? Which gets us to the funding question. I think someone's already asked the funding question. So our way, the only way as an economist I know to answer that question is, if we know the effectiveness, we know the limits, we know the costs of adaptation, then we can answer the funding question. Then we can tell, which country needs how much in what context. So that's my non-answer to your great question. But I hope that was enough.
Yeah, thank you, Shaura. I think you've pointed to some really important research priority topics, including the question of attribution and how to assess adaptation effectiveness. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. I agree on attribution, certainly up to a point, right? I think that where it can be very helpful is ensuring that we're being very targeted. For biodiversity and ecosystems, we know that climate change and biodiversity will come along together. So I think that even here, before we start making, along with it being a policy problem and a problem of action, it is also still one of fundamental knowledge. So I think there's a lot of room for better understanding of these interlinkages. And so I would encourage, it is both a problem for, I think it's a problem, actually, I'll just say sort of across all disciplines. I think it's very, very interdisciplinary. I think in addition to that, though, in addition to sort of helping continue to refine new scientific insights, I think research will have also a very strong role in enabling some of that systematic and transparent documentation of progress. I think if science has, we can help foster accountability. We can point to places where there's a need for course corrections. And ultimately to help improve resource allocation. So I think that there's a real call for sort of continuous research agenda here. And I would note sort of favorably some of the efforts that are trying to use AI machine learning in smart ways to try to, gather the evidence faster, process it in ways that that can give us sort of that iterative learning on shorter timescales and adjust our strategies. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much for, again, building on the initial thoughts. And what I really like is not just stopping at the research as an area that is picking up on these key questions and research agenda items, but it's also how it feeds back into the policy processes, and also the potential of drawing on emerging technology to enhance how we avail evidence of adaptation. Still sticking to the theme on research, I would like to turn to Teresa. If you can highlight perhaps how the IPCC, as one of the biggest organizations or research bodies that is synthesizing evidence on adaptation, and how you see its role in availing evidence on adaptation, both implementation and effectiveness, and perhaps if you can touch on some of the planned work for the current cycle of the IPCC and how that might help to operationalize the GGA.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be going after research because that's what we depend on. The IPCC report is only as good as the research that comes out in the years that the assessment considers publications, which means the next few years are really crucial, or maybe the last few as well, for research to come out on effectiveness. I think this was noted in the sixth assessment that there wasn't much data. This data is pretty sparse, although there was some conclusions on how a lot of these efforts seem to be more incremental than transformative. So I think that there was some findings coming out of AR6, but I think most people agreed, and I think this is what also generated the kind of program for the GGA and the onward progress of this work is the need for more of these studies. There's going to be a concerted effort. I think there are efforts underway to try to consider more of what people call, well, it's not really gray literature, but non-peer-reviewed literature, because I know as somebody who comes from implementation, who used to do technical support for Green Climate Fund projects or GEF projects, that a lot of data information sits at that country level. A lot of the challenges and a lot of the solutions also sit there. A lot of this is not written up, systematically written up. So I don't have the clear solution to that, except that we should have some documentation of this in order for the next for the seventh assessment to become a really strong one for an understanding effectiveness, understanding maladaptation, as the things that were mentioned. So some of the opportunities are we do have the outlines on this. The outline of the seventh assessment is very fresh. It's really like 3 weeks old, 3.5 weeks old, because it was just agreed. So I think you can already find it online and see the outline of all the chapters. And I'm very happy to say that we have a really good place to assess adaptation. There's a section called the Global Assessment Chapters, which looks like vulnerability, impacts, risks, adaptation progress and effectiveness, and also some of the drivers and solutions. We also have the seventh assessment will also have an update to the technical guidelines for assessing climate change impacts and adaptation, which was published in 1994, which was a lifetime ago for many of us working on adaptation. But I think that's a great opportunity, because I do know that although it's been sort of sitting there quiet in its 1994 space, that a lot of NAP guidelines and other guidelines that have come, between then and now have also, been inspired by that. So I think this is a real opportunity to take stock of where we're at, and also have these guidelines as a way to be in conversation with the indicators that are coming up, but also more importantly to what it might generate of the kinds of work that is needed to bring these indicators to life, whether to, new methodologies for collecting data, the understanding of proxies, and sort of the support that is needed to make sure that we have a meaningful way to address, to measure progress. Yeah, please check out the website, and if you're potentially could be a lead author or coordinating lead author, please, or review editor, their nomination is open. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing out those several opportunities, including the fact that now also the call for nominations for authors is open. And I think within the CG, there was an email sent out with that regard. Finally, I'd like to return to Michael. If you can highlight for us some of the lessons probably we can draw from current processes of assessing progress in policy priorities, and perhaps in your experience, have you seen the research playing a role in advancing some of these assessments that you currently do, even within the EU? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucy, for this question. Yeah, I'm responding from the perspective of the statisticians, but of course, research plays a very important role, in particular when it comes to methodological development and soundness of information. On the other hand side, statistics is a bit more stable over time, and also maybe considered sometimes a bit clumsy. But on the other hand side, you can have long time series, you have same methodologies, but of course, research is always like a good additional view on also refining the information and to rethinking after a certain period of time if this is what we are producing still the things that we really need. But let me start my statement also from the perspective of saying that a good set of indicators is one that national policymakers and experts find generally useful for informing decision making at national level or subnational level. I would like to emphasize from our experience that global reporting requirements alone are not sufficient. They do not automatically translate into national ownership or acceptance. And this has then also to do, of course, with national strategies to produce the information. So if something is considered as useful from a national perspective, there are lots of incentives to produce the relevant information. A global reporting requirement alone is not enough. So this also leads me to saying that I think whatever we come up at the end of the day in terms of indicators for the GGA, we need to showcase that it's useful for the countries themselves to apply and use these indicators. And I think maybe we can accompany it also with practical guidance on how to use it in various national contexts. This is what we have also experienced in other indicator frameworks. So for example, the Sendai framework indicators have also technical guidance on how to produce the individual indicators and also some hints on how to use them in a national context and not only for the Sendai monitor. Also aligning with existing data systems, in particular with statistical systems, I think is very relevant to showcase that to the producers of the information that national data can be used in multiple ways and we are not reinventing the wheel for a second time or we are not having another data silo. This goes very closely also with what I mentioned in the beginning, that we have to show that these indicators are useful, and therefore I also think that the engagement of the statistics community, in addition to researchers, of course, and also policymakers, is very important. And then one last important point that I already raised in my early intervention, I think the balance between ambition of producing information, so the relevance, and feasibility is also essential. Where I said relevance of an indicator information for a certain policy is very important. On the other hand side, we should not stop selecting indicator because the data is not there or there's no methodology soundness, but we should encourage actually the production of a methodology or the production of this data. So I think these are several experiences from similar work that could be taken into account also in this process. Thank you, Lucy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those reflections and tying it back to the national reporting processes, which I think your reflection also responds to one of the questions that was posted in the Q&A with regard to how this comes back to national reporting processes. So now I'd like to get back to the audience. I know they might have already some questions, but I actually would like to pose back the question that we shared with the panelists, specifically on how maybe participants in their various capacities can see the discussions around the GGA work linking back to their work. And I think even there's a fantastic question in the Q&A with regard to how the CG can advance these discussions on the GGA and how it can help in operationalizing and implementing it. I don't know if there are any colleagues from CG or even outside the CG who would like to share their reflections. You can raise your hand and then we'll unmute you.
I think that there may be because it's a webinar mode, it may not be possible. They have to write in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. No, in that context, I think that's a great question, and I was not hoping to come in, but I think what research organizations like the CG can do is actually work towards filling some of these knowledge gaps that all of us are grappling with, and all the panelists talked about. We do not know if adaptation is effective. There is also a knowledge gap whether the same adaptations will remain effective in a warmer world. Then we have this knowledge gap around attribution that Shaura talked about health, but that also relates to other things. So I think understanding what those gaps are and then using that data and information, and CG, of course, plays an important role because we work in the global south, and often that's where we lack knowledge from. So I think AR7 is also looking at filling some of these knowledge gaps from the global south, from the low and middle income countries. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aditi, for sharing that reflection. And certainly there is that opportunity to continue building the evidence base for adaptation, especially in the global south, where most of us work. Okay, still feel free to keep sharing your reflections in the chat. But for now, I'd like to go back to the panelists and ask if they can share with us a one-sentence takeaway in 30 seconds each, sharing your key insight or maybe what you see as an opportunity moving forward before we get to the closing remarks. And I'll start with Michael.
It's difficult in one sentence, but what I would like to say and reemphasize is that this national buy-in is really relevant. So whatever we are developing, we should consider that at the end of the day, it has to be useful not only for the global overview on what is the status of adaptation, but also from the national perspective. And this also makes the indicators accepted and also a very strong contribution to improving data availability and also quality of the data. So this is, I think, very important. And the second important point, I think, is to reuse to the maximum extent possible indicator sets that are already out there, and also use official statistics to the maximum extent possible. But of course, to adapt them, to change them whenever it is needed and relevant information is missing. So I think this is one of the key takeaways from me in hopefully less than 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Teresa?
Yeah, I think with this, the GGA work, and also with AR7 sort of poised at this point, I think the CG centers have a really important role to play. I think I'm just going to say what Aditi said, that also the time is now to fill in some of these gaps, and the indicators should also just be a jumping off point to a greater conversation on more contextual indicators, and also to help countries and sub-regional entities understand what should be mapped and what should be looked at in order to track progress. So that's all. Yeah.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, so it's so difficult. I think what I'm going to reflect on is that, sort of the nature of the technical efforts. We can clarify risks and attribution, we can identify adaptation responses, and good ways that we believe you can measure progress and what's happening. But I think that there's an element of political commitment and collective vision, the urgency that for adaptation, and also to the extent possible, I think these indicators should more clearly show some of the ambition that's required, so that we really can have adaptation in a world that is increasingly shaped by climate change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shaura.
Yeah, thanks. So my takeaway is, again, integrating social and societal vulnerabilities, including inequalities in our indicator process, getting buy-in from parties. Again, the political buy-in is extremely important for the implementation part. And one point we discussed quite a bit is science will improve. So many of the indicators we may not have right now, we might have them in the next few years. So something that we really need to keep an eye on and be mindful of. Essentially, someone pointed out how we're going to integrate indigenous knowledge. This is an ongoing process, and this is something we all have to keep working on within and across target groups. That'd be my main takeaway, is integrating inequality and societal vulnerability. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much to our 4 panelists for really sharing with us rich insights into how you're engaging with the work on indicators, and also sharing with us some of the opportunities that might exist for us to continue supporting the work on the GGA. So thank you so much for availing your work and your time, and also being very open to share with us these experiences. So next, for our closing remarks, I would like to invite Bruna Verissimo, who works with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil, who are the host of the COP30, and also is an adaptation negotiator. Bruna, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and I would like to congratulate you all for the very in-depth discussions. This is the type of reflections that we were hoping to see happening on their way through to COP30. We believe that COP30 is not just an event in itself, but it's part of a bigger process. So it's really nice to be able to participate in such discussions. As you know, the global framework on global climate resilience, the GGA, is one of the main mandated decisions for COP30. And our presidency is fully engaged with all stakeholders to make sure that the outcomes are concrete and foster implementation. I would like to, just as a quick reflection, to remind you all that the final decision on the GGA is not limited to the UAE Belém work program. We do want to build a scientifically sound set of indicators, but the GGA is bigger than that. And I believe that all of us must not lose the bigger picture into what I've been calling the post-2025 adaptation agenda. At the COP, parties will have an opportunity to raise ambition and to raise adaptation to a higher political level in the agenda through the first high-level dialogue on adaptation, which will be convened by the COP29 and COP30 presidencies. And it would be a chance to also remind ourselves that adaptation is global. It is implemented locally, but the consequences, especially for not adapting, affect our people, our ecosystems, and our economies globally. We will also have a chance to reflect on how to bring more coherence to the process through the adaptation roadmap, especially with a view to align the adaptation process to future global stocktake, which was something that we realized at COP28 that hadn't been done. Specifically on the indicators, I would like to highlight that merely restating existing framework probably will not going to be enough. We need to build, of course, from existing methodologies to what's feasible to design those indicators, but we need indicators in this framework that are fit for purpose and are impactful. And Brazil has a lot of confidence in the work that has been carried out by the experts. I have attended, as you know, the workshop in Bonn last week, and I could see how engaged all the groups are into actually delivering technical inputs to help the negotiators to come up with a concrete outcome out of the work program. So we're very confident in these technical input. the convening of experts is actually an innovation in the UNFCCC process, and we believe that it is a very helpful one. It was an opportunity for us to bring the scientific community, to bring other types of knowledge, indigenous people's knowledge from local communities into the agenda, into the table. So this was a very, very important input that we are now receiving, now we're able to receive from experts. And we, at COP30, will have also an opportunity to reflect on and make a stock take of how this work has actually helped us to deliver the outcomes on adaptation. Just a fun fact, I was hearing Teresa on the IPCC, and I wasn't even born in 1994. So, I mean, this is just highlights how important it is for us to continue to update and bring together the political and the technical so that we can actually move forward in the adaptation agenda. So all in all, this is a very exciting moment for adaptation. And I believe we're not in a position to lose momentum. And we're also not in a position to avoid the difficult conversations. And I heard you all say expressing your concerns on how to address means of implementation and all the other details that in the negotiation, they're very political, as they should be, they have always been. But we firmly believe that the interactions throughout the year and also the technical inputs that the experts will provide can help us to navigate in these complex discussions that we need to have in Bonn and also at the COP. So thank you so much for the invitation, and please count on us to help in any way that we can, and to provide our views into how we believe that this outcome, that how adaptation should be addressed at COP30 and further on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bruna, for confirming the relevance and high priority the agenda in GGA is for the COP30 presidency, and also reminding us about the new mechanisms that we can use to make sure that agenda on adaptation continues to remain a high priority even as we move to the other COPs. So with that, thank you all for really actively engaging in this conversation. I've really enjoyed moderating this, and I hope we can continue with these conversations, and we'll certainly be reaching out for further engagement via email. And with this, I'd like to hand it over to Aditi.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you all panelists. Thank you, Bruna, for an excellent session. I don't know how that 1 hour passed, so it was just so gripping. Just stay tuned. Our next series would be on just transition in agri-food system. Just transition is another negotiation stream in the UNFCCC, but agriculture has not been very prominently kind of considered in the just transition work, where it has been mostly around energy. And so we are interested in understanding how that can happen. So our next discussion, we do not have the dates yet, but it will be out soon. But sometime in the 3rd week of April, we would have our next session in the series on COP29 to COP30, focusing on just transition. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.